She was on her way to the meeting about her husband's inheritance. As she got into her car, a homeless man stumbled toward her from behind a concrete pillar in the parking garage. His clothes were dirty and torn, but his eyes held a sharpness that made Bernice Thompson pause instead of immediately driving away. "Ma'am, please don't go up there," he said, his voice urgent but not threatening. "They're going to try to take everything from you." Bernice gripped her steering wheel tighter. At 54, she had learned to be cautious, especially after Harold's death 6 months ago had left her vulnerable in ways she never expected. The man looked desperate, but something in his manner suggested he wasn't asking for money. "I'm sorry, but I have an important meeting," she said through her partially opened window. "With Attorney Cross?" the man asked. "About your husband Harold's estate?" Bernice's heart stopped. How could this stranger know such personal details? She studied his face more carefully. Despite his rough appearance, his speech was educated, his posture suggesting someone who had once held themselves with dignity. "I know this sounds crazy," he continued, "but I was sleeping in the alley behind this building last night. The windows were open on the 3rd floor, that's Cross's office. I heard everything." "Heard what?" Bernice asked, though every instinct told her to drive away. "Your daughter-in-law Natasha and that lawyer, they're planning to have you declared mentally incompetent. They've got fake medical reports, forged documents, the whole thing. They want to take control of Harold's money." The words hit Bernice like ice water. Natasha had been acting strange lately, overly concerned about Bernice's well-being, constantly asking about her memory and suggesting she might need help managing her affairs. Bernice had thought it was genuine concern, but now... "That's impossible," Bernice whispered, but even as she said it, pieces began falling into place. The sudden meeting request, Natasha's insistence on coming along, the lawyer Harold had never mentioned before. "Ma'am, my name is Raymond Parker. I used to be an accountant before. Well, before everything fell apart. I still know how these things work. They're using Section 14.5 of the probate code. It lets them petition for emergency guardianship if they can prove immediate mental incompetence." Bernice's hands shook. Raymond Parker spoke with the precision of someone who understood legal procedures. "Why are you telling me this?" Ray's expression softened. "Because I lost everything when people I trusted betrayed me. I ended up here on the streets, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not when I can do something to stop it." "But how do I know you're telling the truth?" "Check your husband's real medical records. Check what doctor actually examined you recently. Check if Harold ever met with Attorney Cross before he died." Ray stepped back from the car. "I'm not asking for anything, ma'am. Just, be careful up there. Don't sign anything. Don't admit to any memory problems, even small ones. And whatever you do, don't let them know I warned you." Bernice sat in her car, mind racing. Harold had been meticulous about his affairs, always transparent with her about their finances and legal matters. He had never mentioned Attorney Cross or any concerns about her mental state. In fact, just before his heart attack, Harold had been helping her organize her own investment portfolio, praising her sharp mind and attention to detail. "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "what should I do? Go to the meeting but play dumb? Act like nothing's wrong but don't sign anything today? Tell them you want to review everything with your own attorney first? Buy yourself time to get evidence?" Ray started to walk away, then turned back. "Mrs. Thompson? Your husband Harold, he came down to the alley sometimes, brought me sandwiches, talked to me like I was still human. He was a good man. He wouldn't want this happening to you." As Ray disappeared back into the shadows of the parking garage, Bernice sat in her car, her heart pounding. Everything she thought she knew about her life after Harold's death suddenly seemed uncertain. Natasha, who had married her stepson Alexander 3 years ago, had become increasingly involved in Bernice's affairs since the funeral. What Bernice had interpreted as care might have been calculation. She checked her watch. The meeting was in 10 minutes. She could drive away, but then what? If there really was a conspiracy against her, running would only make her look guilty, unstable. Instead, she would do what Ray suggested: go to the meeting but stay alert, sign nothing, and buy time to uncover the truth. Taking a deep breath, Bernice checked her appearance in the rearview mirror. Her dark skin glowed with health, her hair was perfectly styled, and her eyes were clear and intelligent. She looked nothing like someone suffering from mental decline. Whatever game Natasha and this lawyer were playing, Bernice would not go down without a fight. She locked her car and walked toward the elevator, every sense heightened. The homeless man's warning echoed in her mind, but more than that, she remembered Harold's voice. "Bernice, you're the strongest, smartest woman I know. Don't let anyone ever convince you otherwise." The elevator doors opened and Bernice stepped inside, preparing for the battle of her life. The law office of Cross and Associates occupied the entire third floor, with expensive furnishings and panoramic city views that spoke of success and established clientele. Bernice had expected to feel intimidated, but instead she felt alert, every detail registering with unusual clarity thanks to Ray's warning. Natasha was already waiting in the reception area, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer suit making her look like she belonged in this world of power and money. She stood immediately when Bernice entered, her smile bright but somehow not reaching her eyes. "Bernice, thank goodness you made it safely. I was worried about you driving downtown by yourself." Natasha's concern seemed genuine, but now Bernice heard the undertone, the subtle suggestion that she wasn't capable of handling simple tasks. "I've been driving for 35 years, Natasha. I think I can manage a few city blocks." Of course. I just worry, you know? Since Harold passed, you seemed a bit scattered. It's completely natural after such a loss." There it was again, the gentle undermining disguised as care. How long had Natasha been doing this? How many small comments had she made to plant seeds of doubt about Bernice's mental state? "Mrs. Thompson?" A tall man in an expensive suit emerged from an inner office. "I'm attorney Benjamin Cross. Thank you for coming. Please both of you come in." Cross's office was even more impressive than the reception area, with leather-bound books lining the walls and a massive mahogany desk dominating the space. Bernice noticed immediately that Harold's portrait wasn't anywhere to be seen, despite this supposedly being about his estate. "Now then," Cross began, settling behind his desk while Natasha and Bernice took chairs across from him. "I know this is a difficult time, but we need to address some concerns about the estate administration." Bernice kept her expression neutral. "What kind of concerns?" Cross exchanged a meaningful glance with Natasha before opening a thick file. "Well, there are some irregularities in Harold's final instructions and frankly, some questions about your current capacity to handle such complex financial matters." "Excuse me?" Bernice's voice remained steady, but inside, her anger flared. "I've been managing complex financial matters my entire adult life. I have 2 business degrees and worked as a financial consultant for 20 years before I married Harold." "Yes, but that was some time ago," Cross said smoothly. "And grief can affect cognitive function in unexpected ways. We have some medical documentation that suggests." "What medical documentation?" Bernice interrupted. "I haven't seen any doctors recently except for my annual checkup with Dr. Foster, and she certainly didn't express any concerns about my mental state." Natasha leaned forward, her hand reaching toward Bernice's arm in a gesture of support. "Bernice, honey, don't you remember? You've been having those memory lapses. Just last week you forgot about our lunch appointment, and Alexander said you called him twice in one day asking the same question." Bernice stared at her daughter-in-law. She remembered the lunch appointment perfectly. Natasha had canceled at the last minute, claiming a work emergency. And the phone calls to Alexander? She had called once to ask about his birthday plans and once to check on his promotion at work. 2 different topics, 2 different days. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Bernice said carefully. Cross pulled out several documents from the file. "These are preliminary competency evaluations based on observations from family members and some concerning patterns they've documented. According to these reports, you've shown signs of confusion, memory loss, and poor judgment in financial matters." Bernice's hands clenched in her lap. The homeless man had been right, they had prepared extensively for this meeting. But she noticed something. Cross kept referring to reports and evaluations without actually showing them to her. "I'd like to see those documents," she said. "Of course." Cross handed her a stack of papers, but held on to them for just a moment too long, as if reluctant to let her review them. The important thing is that Harold was apparently concerned about this possibility. He left specific instructions about what should happen if questions arose about your ability to manage the estate. Bernice scanned the documents quickly. They were filled with medical terminology and official-looking letterhead, but something felt wrong. The dates didn't align with her actual activities, and some of the incidents described never happened at all. More importantly, the doctor's signature on the evaluation wasn't from Dr. Foster, but from someone she'd never heard of. "Dr. Martin Hoffman," she read aloud. "I've never met this doctor. When was this evaluation supposedly conducted?" Natasha shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "You might not remember, Bernice. The memory issues have been getting worse." "My memory is fine, Natasha. And I would certainly remember meeting with a psychiatrist for a competency evaluation." Bernice set the papers down firmly. "These documents are fraudulent." Cross's professional demeanor didn't waver. Mrs. Thompson, I understand this is upsetting, but denial is often part of the process. The important thing is that we address Harold's concerns in a way that protects both you and the estate. What exactly are you suggesting? A temporary guardianship arrangement, Cross said, pulling out more papers. Just until we can sort everything out properly. Natasha and Alexander would handle the financial decisions while you focus on your health and recovery. The trap was closing exactly as Ray had warned. Bernice could see the careful orchestration now, the fake medical reports, the twisted interpretations of normal interactions, the sudden appearance of a lawyer Harold had never mentioned. But she also saw their weakness. They were rushing. If their evidence was solid, they wouldn't need her signature today. This is a lot to process, Bernice said, buying time. I'd like to review everything with my own attorney before making any decisions. Cross's eye twitched almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Thompson, the estate is in a precarious position right now. Delays could result in significant financial losses. Harold's investments were always conservative and stable. I can't imagine what kind of emergency would require immediate action. Bernice stood up, her decision made. I'm not signing anything today. I'll have my lawyer review these documents and get back to you. Natasha's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Bernice, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We're trying to help you. If you want to help me, you'll be patient while I do my due diligence. Harold always said never to sign anything without proper review. Bernice gathered her purse. I'll be in touch. As she walked toward the door, she heard Cross say quietly to Natasha, we may need to accelerate the timeline. Outside in the hallway, Bernice's composure finally cracked. Her hands shook as she pressed the elevator button. The homeless man had been right about everything, which meant Harold's inheritance, their life's work together, was under attack from people she had trusted. But now she knew what she was fighting, and Bernice Thompson had never backed down from a fight in her life. Bernice drove home in a daze, her mind reeling from what she had discovered. The modest suburban house she had shared with Harold for 8 years felt different now, no longer a sanctuary but potentially a target. She parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The first thing she needed was proof. Ray had suggested checking Harold's real medical records and finding out if he had ever actually met with Attorney Cross. But beyond that, she needed to understand exactly what Natasha and Cross were planning and how long this conspiracy had been in motion. Inside the house, Bernice went straight to Harold's study, a room she had barely touched since his death. Harold had been meticulous about record-keeping, filing every document in labeled folders within a large filing cabinet. If there were any connections to Cross or any real concerns about her mental state, the evidence would be here. She started with Harold's legal documents. His will, their marriage certificate, insurance policies, investment records, everything was exactly as she remembered, with no mention of Attorney Cross or any law firm by that name. Harold's actual attorney was Robert Sterling, a family friend who had handled their affairs for years. Why hadn't Sterling contacted her about the estate? Bernice found Sterling's business card and called his office. The receptionist informed her that Sterling was out of town at a legal conference but would be back Monday. That was 3 days away. She left an urgent message asking him to call as soon as possible. Next, she called Dr. Foster's office. The nurse confirmed that Bernice's last appointment had been her annual physical 4 months ago, and that Dr. Foster had noted no concerns about cognitive function or mental health. When Bernice asked about Dr. Martin Hoffman, the nurse had never heard of him. However, the nurse said, someone did call last week asking for copies of your medical records. They said they were from a law firm and had authorization from you. I never gave such authorization, Bernice said. Who did you speak with? A woman. She had your basic information: address, social security number, date of birth. She seemed legitimate, so we sent copies of your recent records. Bernice's stomach dropped. They had used her personal information to fraudulently obtain her medical records, probably to create the fake evaluation she had seen in Cross's office. I need you to put a hold on my records immediately. No one gets access without speaking to me directly first. After hanging up, Bernice continued searching Harold's files. In the folder marked Personal Correspondence, she found something that made her heart race. It was a letter from Harold to herself, sealed and marked, to be opened only if questions arise about my final wishes. With trembling hands, Bernice opened the envelope. Harold's familiar handwriting filled 2 pages. My dearest Bernice, if you are reading this, it means someone has challenged my will or raised questions about your ability to handle our affairs. I want you to know that I have absolute confidence in your intelligence, judgment, and strength. You are the most capable person I know. I am writing this because I have noticed some concerning behavior from Natasha. She has asked several probing questions about our finances and seemed particularly interested in what would happen if something happened to both of us. Alexander appears to be unaware of his wife's interest in our money, but I worry about her motivations. If anyone questions your mental capacity, please know that it is a lie. You have never shown any signs of cognitive decline, and I have specifically included provisions in my will to protect you from such false claims. The real copy of my will is in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, Box 247. Only you have access. I have also left a sealed letter with instructions for Robert Sterling. Trust no one but Sterling with legal matters. If he is unavailable, contact Judge Patricia Wells at the county courthouse. She is an old friend and will ensure you receive fair treatment. Remember, my love, you are stronger than you know. Fight for what is rightfully yours. All my love always, Harold. Bernice sat back in Harold's chair, tears streaming down her face. Even in death, her husband was protecting her. But the letter also confirmed her worst fears. Natasha had been planning this for months, possibly years. And if Harold had left specific instructions with Sterling, why was Cross claiming to represent the estate? She needed to get to that safe deposit box immediately. But first she needed to be careful. If Natasha and Cross were monitoring her activities, any sudden trips to the bank might alert them that she was onto their scheme. Bernice looked out the window and saw a familiar figure walking down the street. Ray, the homeless man, was pushing a shopping cart filled with his possessions. On impulse, she went outside and called to him. Ray looked around nervously before approaching her yard. Mrs. Thompson? How did the meeting go? You were right about everything. They had fake medical reports, forged documents, the whole thing. Bernice glanced around to make sure none of her neighbors were watching. I need help, and I think you're the only person I can trust right now. Ray's expression grew serious. What do you need? I found a letter from my husband. He left the real will in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. But I'm afraid if I go alone, they might be watching me. You want me to come with you? I want you to help me think this through. You said you used to be an accountant. You understand how these financial schemes work. Ray looked down at his ragged clothes, then back at Bernice. Mrs. Thompson, I appreciate your trust, but I'm not exactly dressed for banking. Harold left some clothes in the guest room closet. You're about the same size. Bernice made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Come inside. I'll make us some coffee and we can plan our next move. Ray hesitated. Ma'am, I haven't been inside a real home in almost 2 years. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. You may have saved my life today, Ray. The least I can do is offer you a hot meal and a chance to clean up. As they walked into the house together, Bernice felt something shift. For the first time since Harold's death, she wasn't facing her problems alone. She had an ally, someone with the skills to help her fight back against Natasha's conspiracy. Ray, she said as they entered the kitchen, tell me everything you overheard last night. I need to know exactly what we're up against. Ray's expression grew grim. Mrs. Thompson, what I heard was worse than just stealing your inheritance. They were talking about having you committed to a psychiatric facility. Permanently. The coffee cup slipped from Bernice's hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. The stakes were even higher than she had imagined. This wasn't just about money, it was about her freedom, her very life. Ray stood awkwardly in Bernice's kitchen, clearly overwhelmed by the warmth and cleanliness of the space. She could see him taking in details: the family photos on the refrigerator, the neat countertops, the sense of home he hadn't experienced in years. Sit down, Bernice said gently, sweeping up the broken coffee cup. Let me get you something to eat while you tell me what you heard. She prepared sandwiches and fresh coffee while Ray settled at the kitchen table. Now that she could observe him closely, she noticed things she had missed in the parking garage. Despite his rough appearance, his hands were clean, his fingernails trimmed. He carried himself like someone who had once been accustomed to respect. Before we talk about what I overheard, Ray said, I think you should know my story. You deserve to understand who you're trusting. Bernice set a plate in front of him and sat down across the table. I'm listening. I was a CPA for 15 years. Had my own practice, nice house in Riverside, married to a wonderful woman named Janet. Then my business partner started embezzling client funds and made it look like I was involved. Ray's voice was steady, but Bernice could hear the pain beneath. By the time the investigation was over, I was cleared of criminal charges, but the damage was done. Lost my license, lost my business, lost everything. Janet couldn't handle the shame and uncertainty. She left. I'm sorry, Ray. I started drinking, stopped taking care of myself. Been on the streets for almost 2 years now. But I never lost my understanding of how financial fraud works. He took a bite of the sandwich and closed his eyes for a moment, savoring it. Thank you for this. Now tell me what you heard last night. Ray's expression grew serious. I was sleeping in the alley behind the Cross building around 11 p.m. when I heard voices from the open window above. Cross was meeting with a woman from Context. I knew it was Natasha. What exactly did they say? Cross was worried about the timeline. He said you seemed sharper than expected during previous encounters, and they needed to move fast before you got suspicious. Natasha assured him that you were already showing signs of confusion and that Alexander would back up their story. Bernice felt a chill. Alexander is part of this? Not exactly. From what I gathered, Alexander genuinely believes you're having memory problems because that's what Natasha has been telling him. She's been manipulating situations to make you seem confused, then reporting back to her husband about your concerning behavior. What kind of situations? Like calling you for lunch, then not showing up and later claiming you forgot. Asking Alexander to tell you something important, then having you call him about it and acting like you're repeating yourself. Small things that seem innocent individually but create a pattern of supposed confusion. Bernice's anger grew as she realized how systematically she had been manipulated. What else did you hear? They were discussing the forged medical evaluation. Cross has a contact at a psychiatric facility who created the fake report for $5,000. The plan was to get you declared incompetent today, then have you committed for evaluation within 48 hours. Committed? The word came out as barely a whisper. Once you're in the facility, they can keep you there indefinitely while they petition the court for permanent guardianship. Cross said that with the right judge and the medical documentation they've created, it would be nearly impossible for you to prove your competency from inside a psychiatric ward. Bernice stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The plan was more diabolic than she had imagined. Not only would she lose Harold's inheritance, but she would lose her freedom entirely, perhaps for the rest of her life. There's more, Ray continued quietly. Cross mentioned that Harold's reel will contain some kind of safeguard against exactly this kind of scheme. That's why they need to move quickly before anyone can access the genuine documents. Bernice turned back to face him. Harold left the real will in a safe deposit box. He also wrote me a letter explaining that he suspected Natasha's motives. Smart man. Did he leave any other protections? He said he left sealed instructions with his real attorney, Robert Sterling. But Sterling is out of town until Monday. Ray was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through the implications. Mrs. Thompson, we have maybe 48 hours before they make their next move. If Sterling isn't available and you can't access the safe deposit box over the weekend, they'll use that delay to claim you're being uncooperative due to mental incompetence. So what do? We gather evidence. We document everything they've done wrong and we prepare to fight back. Ray looked down at his clothes, then back at her. But first, I need to look like someone who could help you rather than someone who would make you seem unstable for associating with me. Bernice smiled for the first time all day. Harold was about your size. Let me show you the guest room. 30 minutes later, Ray emerged transformed. Harold's clothes fit him well, and after a shower and shave, he looked like the professional he had once been. The change was remarkable. His posture straightened, his speech became more confident, and Bernice could easily imagine him in a boardroom or courtroom. Much better, she said. Now what's our strategy? Ray pulled out a small notebook from his clean jacket pocket, one of the few possessions he had maintained from his former life. We need to establish a timeline of their fraud, gather evidence of the forgeries, and document the conspiracy. Most importantly, we need to protect you from any attempts to have you committed before we can present our case. How do we do that? We stay ahead of them. We anticipate their moves and counter each one. And we find allies, people who can testify to your mental competency and who can't be bought or intimidated. Bernice felt a surge of hope. For the first time since Harold's death, she felt like she had a partner, someone who understood both her situation and how to fight back effectively. Ray, I have a proposition for you. Help me save Harold's legacy and I'll help you rebuild your life. We both have something to fight for now. Ray extended his hand across the table. Mrs. Thompson, you have yourself an accountant. As they shook hands, Bernice realized that Natasha and Cross had made a critical error. They had assumed she was isolated and vulnerable, with no one to turn to for help. But they hadn't counted on the homeless man in the alley, or the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The battle for her inheritance and her freedom was just beginning. Saturday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and new determination. Bernice woke early, her mind already focused on the tasks ahead. Ray had spent the night in the guest room, the first real bed he had slept in for nearly 2 years, and emerged looking more refreshed and professional than she could have imagined. Over breakfast they reviewed their strategy. Ray had filled several pages in his notebook with a detailed plan that impressed Bernice with its thoroughness and legal insight. First priority is getting to that safe deposit box, Ray said, consulting his notes. The bank opens at 9 on Saturdays. We go together, you as the account holder, me as your financial advisor. Will they accept you in that role without documentation? We're not asking them to give me access, just accompanying you for support. Perfectly legal and normal. Ray smiled. I still remember how to talk to bankers. At exactly 9 a.m. they walked into First National Bank. Bernice had called ahead to confirm that Saturday access to safe deposit boxes was available, and the process went smoothly. Ray's presence seemed to lend credibility to the transaction. The bank manager treated them both with professional courtesy. In the privacy of the safe deposit box viewing room, Bernice opened box 247 and found exactly what Harold had promised. The real will was there, along with 2 sealed envelopes marked for Robert Sterling and for Judge Patricia Wells. Ray read through the will carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. Mrs. Thompson, this changes everything. Harold didn't just protect you, he set a trap for anyone trying to defraud the estate. What do you mean? Look at section 12. Harold specifically states that if anyone questions your mental competency or attempts to have you declared incompetent, all assets immediately transfer to an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary. The trust can only be administered by a court-appointed guardian, and Harold specifically requested Judge Wells for that role. Bernice studied the document. So even if they succeeded in having me declared incompetent, they still wouldn't get the money? Exactly. The money would be protected in trust, managed by a judge Harold trusted, with you receiving all benefits regardless of your legal status. It's brilliant. It removes any financial incentive for having you declared incompetent. They made copies of everything before returning the originals to the safe deposit box. Their next stop was the courthouse, where Bernice hoped to find Judge Wells and deliver Harold's sealed letter. Saturday court sessions were limited, but Judge Wells was reviewing cases in her chambers. Her secretary, initially reluctant to disturb the judge, changed her attitude when Bernice mentioned Harold Thompson's name. Judge Wells will see you immediately, the secretary said after a brief phone conversation. Judge Patricia Wells was a distinguished African-American woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She greeted Bernice warmly and listened intently as Bernice explained the situation. Harold was one of my dearest friends, Judge Wells said after reading his sealed letter. He came to me 6 months before his death, very concerned about some behavior he had observed from your daughter-in-law. He suspected she might try something like this. So you'll help us? I'll do more than help, I'll ensure justice is done. Judge Wells' expression grew stern. What they're attempting is elder fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potentially kidnapping if they try to have you committed based on false documentation. These are serious crimes. Ray leaned forward. Your Honor, we believe they're planning to accelerate their timeline. If we don't act quickly, they may try to have Mrs. Thompson committed as early as Monday. Not if I have anything to say about it. Judge Wells picked up her phone. I'm issuing an emergency protective order right now. No one can petition for your commitment or guardianship without a proper hearing in my courtroom, with adequate legal representation. Bernice felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt truly protected. But we still need evidence of their fraud, Judge Wells continued. The protective order buys us time, but to prosecute them successfully, we need proof of conspiracy and forgery. Ray consulted his notebook again. We have several leads. The fake medical evaluation was supposedly conducted by Dr. Martin Hoffman. I'd like to verify whether this person actually exists, and if so, whether he was paid to create false documentation. I can help with that, Judge Wells said. I'll have the court investigator look into Dr. Hoffman's credentials and recent activities. We also know that Cross has a contact at a psychiatric facility who created the forged report for $5,000, Bernice added. Even better. Financial transactions leave paper trails. If Cross paid someone for fraudulent documents, we can trace that money. Judge Wells made more notes. What else? Ray looked at Bernice, then back at the judge. Your Honor, I overheard their conversation by accident, but I think we need more direct evidence. If they're planning to accelerate their timeline, they'll need to communicate with each other about their next steps. You're suggesting surveillance? I'm suggesting we give them an opportunity to incriminate themselves. If Mrs. Thompson contacts Natasha and expresses concerns about the legal proceedings, Natasha might reveal more about their plans. Judge Wells considered this carefully. It's risky, but if properly documented, recorded conversations could provide excellent evidence of conspiracy. Is that legal? Bernice asked. In this state, you can record conversations if at least one party consents, and since you would be one of the parties, your consent is sufficient. Judge Wells wrote down a phone number. Call Detective Maria Santos. Tell her I sent you. She specializes in elder fraud cases and can help you set up proper recording equipment. By Sunday evening, Bernice and Ray had assembled a comprehensive case file. Detective Santos had provided them with recording equipment and coached them on legal requirements for gathering evidence. The court investigator had confirmed that Dr. Martin Hoffman was a real psychiatrist, but one who had lost his license 2 years ago for falsifying patient records. The fake evaluation had been created by someone with no legal authority to practice medicine. Most importantly, they had recorded 3 phone conversations with Natasha. In the first call, Bernice had expressed confusion about the legal proceedings and concern about her memory. Natasha had responded by encouraging these doubts and suggesting that Bernice might need professional help to sort through her confusion. In the second call, Bernice had asked specific questions about the medical evaluation she supposedly underwent. Natasha had become flustered, contradicting herself several times and finally suggesting that Bernice's failure to remember the evaluation was itself evidence of her declining mental state. The third call had been the breakthrough. When Bernice expressed reluctance to sign any legal documents, Natasha had lost her composure and made several incriminating statements about needing to move quickly and ensuring that Bernice received appropriate care before she could cause problems for everyone. As they reviewed the evidence Sunday night, Ray smiled with satisfaction. We have them, Mrs. Thompson. Conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, it's all documented now. Bernice looked at the man who had become her unlikely partner in this fight. Ray, I don't know how to thank you. You already have. You gave me back my purpose, my dignity. You reminded me that I'm still the man who knows how to fight financial fraud. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow we take everything to Judge Wells and watch justice be served. And then, Mrs. Thompson, you get your life back. Monday morning brought unexpected developments that would change everything. Bernice woke to find 3 voicemails on her phone, all left late Sunday night. The first was from Robert Sterling, Harold's real attorney, who had returned early from his conference after receiving her urgent message. The second was from Detective Santos, reporting a breakthrough in their investigation. The third was from Alexander, Harold's son, requesting an emergency meeting. Ray emerged from the guest room already dressed in Harold's best suit, ready for what they both knew would be a decisive day. Over coffee, they listened to Sterling's message together. Mrs. Thompson, I'm deeply concerned by your voicemail. I've been trying to reach you for weeks about irregularities in Harold's estate, but someone has been intercepting my calls and letters. I have critical information you need to hear immediately. Please call me as soon as you get this message. Bernice dialed Sterling's number, putting the call on speaker so Ray could hear. Bernice, thank God. Sterling's voice was filled with relief. I've been worried sick about you. Someone has been impersonating me and claiming to represent Harold's estate. You mean Attorney Cross? I've never heard of Benjamin Cross, but someone using my name has been contacting various financial institutions and attempting to access Harold's accounts. They've also been spreading rumors in the legal community about your mental health. Ray leaned toward the phone. Mr. Sterling, this is Raymond Parker, Mrs. Thompson's financial advisor. We've uncovered an extensive conspiracy involving forged documents and false medical evaluations. How much do you know about Harold's concerns regarding his daughter-in-law? Everything. Harold came to me several times in his final months, documenting suspicious behavior and asking me to create additional protections for Bernice. That's why I've been trying to reach her. There are sealed instructions that need to be executed immediately. What kind of instructions? Bernice asked. Harold suspected that if anything happened to him, Natasha would attempt to gain control of the estate through fraudulent means. He created a comprehensive counter-strategy, including documentation of her suspicious activities and legal mechanisms to protect you. Bernice felt a chill of both relief and apprehension. Harold was investigating Natasha? More than investigating, he was building a case. He hired a private investigator to document her activities, recorded several conversations where she made incriminating statements, and created a detailed timeline of her attempts to gain information about your finances. Ray was making rapid notes. Do you still have all this evidence? Everything is in a sealed file, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Harold's instructions were very specific. The information should only be disclosed if Natasha actually attempted to defraud Bernice or have her declared incompetent. That moment has arrived, Bernice said grimly. Then it's time for the final revelation. Can you come to my office this morning? And bring whatever evidence you've gathered. Harold's plan works best when combined with proof of their current activities. After confirming their appointment with Sterling, Bernice returned Detective Santos's call. The detective's news was equally significant. Mrs. Thompson, we've made a major breakthrough. Dr. Martin Hoffman has agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity from prosecution. He's provided us with detailed information about his arrangement with Attorney Cross. What kind of arrangement? Cross has been paying Hoffman to create false medical evaluations for several different cases, not just yours. It's part of a larger elder fraud scheme targeting wealthy widows and widowers. Hoffman estimates they've stolen millions of dollars from vulnerable seniors over the past 2 years. Bernice sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the conspiracy. How many people have they hurt? At least 12 that we know of so far. You're the first victim who discovered their scheme before they could complete it. Your evidence is going to help us prosecute not just your case, but potentially free others who are currently trapped in fraudulent guardianships. The weight of responsibility settled on Bernice's shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom, she was fighting for other victims who might not have been as fortunate as she was to discover the truth in time. Detective Santos, what about the psychiatric facility that was going to house me? We're investigating that as well. If they knowingly participated in fraudulent commitments, they'll face serious charges. Elder abuse is a federal crime when it crosses state lines, and these facilities often transport patients between states to avoid oversight. The third call was the most difficult. Alexander, her stepson, sounded confused and upset when she reached him. Bernice, I need to see you right away. Something's not right about Natasha's story, and I'm starting to think I've made a terrible mistake. What do you mean? She told me you've been having serious memory problems and that we needed to get you professional help. But when I talked to some of your friends at church yesterday, they all said you seemed completely normal. And then I found some papers in Natasha's home office. Alexander's voice trailed off, and Bernice could hear the pain in his silence. What kind of papers, Alexander? Financial records, medical reports, legal documents all about you. And there was a letter from some attorney I've never heard of, talking about guardianship proceedings and institutional care. Bernice, I think my wife has been lying to me about everything. Can you meet us at Robert Sterling's office at 10 this morning? I think it's time you learn the whole truth. Us. I have a friend helping me, someone who understands financial fraud. His name is Ray Parker. I'll be there. And Bernice? I'm so sorry. I should have known better than to trust anyone over family. As they prepared to leave for Sterling's office, Ray took Bernice's hand. Are you ready for this? Once we reveal everything, there's no going back. Your relationship with Alexander and Natasha will never be the same. Harold always said the truth might be painful, but lies are worse. Alexander deserves to know what kind of woman he married, and I deserve justice for what they tried to do to me. And the other victims deserve to be free. Bernice nodded, thinking about the 12 other people who had fallen into Cross and Natasha's trap. Then let's go get them their lives back. As they drove towards Sterling's office, Bernice felt a strange sense of completion. Harold had protected her even in death, but more than that, he had given her the tools to protect others. The shy, grieving widow who had been targeted for her vulnerability was gone, replaced by a woman with purpose and allies who believed in justice. The revelation was about to begin, and Bernice Thompson was ready to fight not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they were too old, too confused, or too weak to deserve the truth. Sterling's law office was located in a converted Victorian mansion downtown, a marked contrast to the sleek corporate environment of Cross and Associates. As Bernice and Ray entered the familiar surroundings where she and Harold had handled their affairs for years, she felt a sense of homecoming mixed with anticipation. Alexander was already waiting in the reception area, looking haggard and confused. When he saw Bernice, he stood immediately and embraced her, something he hadn't done since Harold's funeral. Bernice, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I let this happen. You were manipulated, Alexander. We all were. Robert Sterling emerged from his office, a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes and an air of old-fashioned integrity. He greeted Bernice warmly before being introduced to Ray and acknowledging Alexander with professional courtesy tinged with concern. "Let's go into the conference room," Sterling said. "What I'm about to show you will be difficult, but it's necessary." The conference room was lined with law books and featured a large mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. Sterling had prepared several files, each labeled with Harold's distinctive handwriting. At the center of the table sat an old-fashioned tape recorder. "Before we begin," Sterling said, addressing Alexander directly, "I want you to understand that your father loved you deeply and never wanted to hurt you. But he became very concerned about Natasha's behavior in the months before his death." Alexander's jaw tightened. "What kind of behavior?" Sterling opened the first file. Harold began documenting incidents in January, about 8 months before he passed away. The first entry describes a conversation where Natasha asked detailed questions about his will and expressed surprise that everything was left to Bernice rather than being divided among family members. "That doesn't seem so unusual," Alexander said defensively. "Perhaps not by itself. But look at the pattern." Sterling spread out a timeline Harold had created. February. Natasha asked about your father's life insurance policies and whether Bernice would be able to manage such a large sum alone. March. She suggested that Bernice seemed scattered after Harold had what she called a minor health scare, which Harold notes never actually occurred. Bernice studied the timeline, seeing months of careful manipulation laid out in Harold's meticulous handwriting. "She was creating a narrative about my mental state even while Harold was alive." "It gets worse," Sterling continued. By April, Natasha was asking Harold directly about what would happen if Bernice became unable to care for herself. She suggested that families should have more involvement in financial decisions, and specifically asked if Harold had considered naming Alexander as a co-trustee of the estate. Alexander's face had gone pale. "She told me Dad was worried about Bernice's memory. She said he had asked her to keep an eye on things." "Your father never expressed any concerns about Bernice's mental state to me or anyone else," Sterling said firmly. In fact, his notes indicate the opposite. He was impressed by her sharp handling of their joint financial planning right up until his death. Ray leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling, you mentioned recorded conversations?" Harold was a thorough man. When he became suspicious of Natasha's motives, he began recording their phone conversations with her consent. She thought they were just family check-ins, but Harold was documenting her attempts to gather information about the estate. Sterling placed several cassette tapes on the table. These recordings span from May through September, just 3 weeks before Harold's heart attack. They show a clear pattern of Natasha attempting to manipulate Harold's perception of Bernice's capabilities while gathering detailed information about their assets. "I want to hear them," Alexander said quietly. The first recording was from early May. Natasha's voice came through clearly as she chatted with Harold about family matters before smoothly transitioning to concerns about Bernice. "Harold, I've been worried about Bernice lately. Alexander and I had dinner with her last week and she seemed a little confused. She asked us the same question 3 times, and she couldn't remember where she had put her car keys." Harold's voice responded with surprise. "That doesn't sound like Bernice at all. Are you sure?" "Oh, I'm sure she's fine overall, but you know how these things can start gradually. Maybe it would be good for her to have more support managing day-to-day things. Alexander and I would be happy to help with bill paying, investment decisions, that sort of thing." Alexander's face crumpled as he listened. "I remember that dinner. She wasn't confused at all. She was tired because she had spent the day helping her sister move. And the car keys were in her purse the whole time. She just couldn't find them in the dark restaurant." The recordings continued, each one showing Natasha's increasing boldness in suggesting Bernice's incompetence while positioning herself and Alexander as the natural solution. In later tapes, she began asking specific questions about Harold's will, his life insurance, and his investment accounts. The most damning recording was from September, just weeks before Harold's death. Natasha's voice had taken on an urgent tone. "Harold, I'm really concerned about leaving Bernice to manage everything alone if something happens to you. She's been making some questionable financial decisions lately. She mentioned wanting to donate money to that homeless shelter, and she's been talking about risky investments. Maybe it would be wise to set up some kind of oversight, just to protect her from herself." Harold's response was sharp. "Natasha, Bernice is one of the most financially savvy people I know. Her idea about supporting the homeless shelter is both generous and tax efficient, and her investment suggestions have consistently outperformed my conservative approach. I'm not sure what you're seeing, but it doesn't match my experience with my wife at all." There was a long pause before Natasha responded, and when she did, her tone was cooler. Of course, Harold. I just worry about family, you know? I want to make sure everyone is taken care of. Sterling stopped the tape. That was the last conversation Harold recorded with Natasha. 3 days later, he came to my office and created the additional protections in his will. 2 weeks after that, he had his fatal heart attack. Alexander sat in stunned silence, his hands clenched into fists on the table. She's been planning this since before Dad died. She manipulated me into believing Bernice was losing her mind. There's more, Sterling said gently. He opened another file. Harold hired a private investigator to look into Natasha's background. What they found was deeply troubling. The investigator's report painted a picture of a woman with a history of targeting older men with assets. Before meeting Alexander, Natasha had been involved with 2 other wealthy widowers, both of whom had died under suspicious circumstances shortly after changing their wills to benefit her. "Oh my God," Alexander whispered. "What kind of monster did I marry?" Bernice reached across the table and took his hand. "You fell in love with someone who presented herself as caring and devoted. That's not your fault, Alexander. It's her fault for being a predator." Ray had been quietly reviewing the investigator's report. "Mr. Sterling, this information needs to go to Detective Santos immediately. If Natasha has a pattern of this behavior, there may be other victims who need justice, and potentially other crimes to investigate." "Already arranged," Sterling said. "I called Detective Santos this morning and provided copies of everything. She's preparing warrants for Natasha's arrest as we speak." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Sterling's secretary knocked and entered. "Mr. Sterling, Detective Santos is on the phone. She says it's urgent." Sterling picked up the conference room phone and put it on speaker. Detective Santos's voice filled the room with news that would change everything. "We've arrested Benjamin Cross at his office this morning. He had a complete breakdown and confessed to everything: the forged documents, the fake medical evaluations, the conspiracy with multiple accomplices including Natasha Thompson. But here's the critical part. Natasha isn't at home and her husband doesn't know where she is. We think she may have realized we were closing in and decided to make one final attempt to neutralize Mrs. Thompson." Bernice felt ice in her veins. "What do you mean, neutralize?" Cross admitted that if the legal approach failed, they had discussed more direct methods of removing you as an obstacle. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to stay exactly where you are until we can provide protection. Natasha Thompson is now considered armed and dangerous." The confrontation had revealed the truth, but it had also escalated the danger to a level none of them had anticipated. The fight for Bernice's inheritance had become a fight for her life. The courthouse buzzed with tension as an emergency hearing was convened in Judge Wells's courtroom. News of Cross's arrest and Natasha's disappearance had spread quickly through the legal community, and several other attorneys were present, representing victims of the elder fraud scheme that was rapidly unraveling. Bernice sat at the plaintiff's table with Sterling and Ray, feeling strangely calm despite the gravity of the situation. 2 police officers flanked the courtroom doors, and Detective Santos sat in the gallery, constantly monitoring her radio for updates on Natasha's whereabouts. Alexander had chosen to sit with Bernice rather than in the section reserved for family members of the accused. His decision to stand with her against his wife had been difficult but necessary, and Bernice admired his courage in facing such a painful truth about someone he had loved. Judge Wells called the court to order, her expression grave as she reviewed the mountain of evidence that had been presented. "This emergency hearing has been called to address the fraudulent guardianship petition filed against Mrs. Bernice Thompson, and to consider the broader implications of what appears to be an extensive criminal conspiracy." The prosecutor, District Attorney James Morrison, rose to present the state's case. Morrison was a seasoned attorney known for his expertise in white-collar crime, and his presence indicated how seriously the authorities were taking this case. "Your Honor, over the past 72 hours, we have uncovered a sophisticated elder fraud operation that has victimized at least 12 individuals and stolen an estimated $4.2 million from vulnerable seniors. The evidence shows that Mrs. Thompson was targeted specifically because of her recent widowhood, her substantial inheritance, and what the conspirators perceived as her isolation and vulnerability." Morrison gestured to several evidence tables that had been set up in the courtroom. "We have documented proof of forged medical evaluations, fraudulent legal documents, and a coordinated conspiracy to have Mrs. Thompson falsely declared mentally incompetent and confined to a psychiatric facility against her will." He paused to let the weight of these charges settle over the courtroom. "But perhaps most significantly, We have evidence that this conspiracy was planned and implemented over a period of more than 18 months, beginning before Mr. Harold Thompson's death and continuing up to the present day. Judge Wells reviewed several documents before addressing the court. Mr. Morrison, what is the current status of the co-conspirators? Benjamin Cross is in custody and has provided a full confession in exchange for cooperation in prosecuting other members of the conspiracy. Dr. Martin Hoffman has also been arrested and is cooperating fully. However, the primary instigator of this particular case, Natasha Thompson, remains at large and is considered a flight risk and potential danger to Mrs. Thompson. Ray leaned over to whisper in Bernice's ear. Look at the gallery behind us. Bernice turned to see nearly 24 elderly individuals seated in the courtroom, many accompanied by family members or caregivers. These were the other victims of Cross's scheme, people who had been trapped in fraudulent guardianships or had their assets stolen through similar conspiracies. Judge Wells noticed them as well. I see we have many interested parties present today. Before we proceed with Mrs. Thompson's specific case, I want to address the broader implications of what has been uncovered here. She stood, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. Elder fraud is one of the most despicable crimes in our legal system. It targets our most vulnerable citizens at their moment of greatest need, exploiting grief, confusion, and isolation for financial gain. What has been perpetrated against Mrs. Thompson and these other victims represents a systematic attack on the dignity and rights of our senior community. The judge's words seemed to strengthen the resolve of everyone present. Bernice felt a sense of connection with the other victims, understanding that her fight had become part of something much larger. Now, regarding the specific case of Mrs. Thompson, Judge Wells continued, I am hereby dismissing with prejudice all petitions for guardianship or competency evaluation. The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Thompson is fully capable of managing her own affairs and that the allegations against her mental state were fabricated for fraudulent purposes. A wave of relief washed over Bernice, but Judge Wells wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate return of all assets that were frozen or transferred as part of this fraudulent scheme. Mrs. Thompson's inheritance will be restored in full, with interest and damages to be paid by the perpetrators of this crime. Sterling squeezed Bernice's hand as Judge Wells addressed the broader impact of the case. For the other victims present today, I want you to know that this court will review every case associated with Benjamin Cross and his accomplices. Any fraudulent guardianships will be immediately dissolved, and stolen assets will be returned to their rightful owners. The elderly victims in the gallery began to weep with relief, some embracing family members, others simply sitting in stunned silence as they processed the news that their long nightmare was finally over. But the moment of celebration was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the courtroom. Detective Santos was speaking urgently into her radio, and several officers were moving toward the exits. Judge Wells called for order as Detective Santos approached the bench. Your Honor, we've located Natasha Thompson. She's been arrested attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country, carrying forged documents and nearly $200,000 in cash. The courtroom erupted in excited murmurs as the final piece of the conspiracy fell into place. She's also provided additional information that implicates several other attorneys and medical professionals in similar schemes operating in 3 other states, Detective Santos continued. This case has opened up a nationwide investigation into elder fraud. Judge Wells smiled for the first time during the hearing. Detective Santos, please ensure that Mrs. Thompson is informed immediately of Natasha Thompson's arrest. I imagine she'll sleep better tonight knowing this threat has been neutralized. As the hearing concluded, Bernice was surrounded by other victims who wanted to thank her for having the courage to fight back. An elderly man with tears in his eyes took her hand and said, "You saved all of us. If you hadn't discovered their scheme, the rest of us might never have gotten our lives back." A woman about Bernice's age embraced her. They had me convinced I was losing my mind. I actually started to believe I was incompetent. Thank you for showing us that we're stronger than they wanted us to think. As they left the courthouse, Alexander walked beside Bernice and Ray, his expression a mixture of relief and sadness. I know I can't undo the damage Natasha caused, but I want you to know that Dad would be proud of how you fought for his memory and for justice. Your father was proud of you too, Alexander. He never blamed you for Natasha's deception. Ray, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the hearing, finally spoke up. Mrs. Thompson, what happens now? Bernice looked at the man who had saved her life by warning her in that parking garage just days ago. Now we help rebuild the lives of everyone who was hurt by this conspiracy. And we make sure this never happens to anyone else. The hearing had delivered justice, but more importantly, It had revealed the power of truth and the strength that comes from people standing together against those who prey on the vulnerable. The fight was over, but the healing was just beginning. 3 months later, the courtroom was once again packed, but this time the atmosphere was one of anticipation rather than crisis. The final sentencing hearing for the elder fraud conspiracy had drawn national media attention, making it one of the most significant white-collar crime prosecutions of the year. Bernice sat in the front row of the gallery, no longer the confused and frightened widow she had appeared to be just months earlier. She wore an elegant navy suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought a difficult battle and emerged victorious. Ray sat beside her, transformed from the homeless man who had saved her life into a professionally dressed advocate for elder rights. The changes in both their lives had been remarkable. Ray had used his reward money from the fraud investigation to secure an apartment, update his wardrobe, and begin the process of regaining his CPA license. Bernice had hired him as her personal financial advisor, but more than that, they had become partners in a mission to protect other seniors from similar schemes. Alexander sat on Bernice's other side, still dealing with the emotional aftermath of his wife's betrayal but committed to making amends for his unwitting role in the conspiracy. The divorce proceedings had been swift and brutal, with Natasha facing not only criminal charges but also civil lawsuits from multiple victims. Judge Wells entered the courtroom with the gravity appropriate to such a significant case. Over the past months, the investigation had expanded far beyond the original conspiracy against Bernice. Federal authorities had identified similar schemes in 7 states, with total losses exceeding $12 million and more than 40 victims. Before we proceed with sentencing, Judge Wells announced, "I want to acknowledge the courage of Mrs. Bernice Thompson, whose decision to fight back against this conspiracy has led to justice for dozens of victims and prevented countless others from falling into similar traps." The gallery erupted in applause as Bernice stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition. Among the spectators were many of the victims whose assets had been restored and whose guardianships had been dissolved. District Attorney Morrison rose to present the state's sentencing recommendations. "Your Honor, the defendants in this case perpetrated one of the most sophisticated elder fraud schemes this court has ever encountered. They targeted vulnerable seniors at their most difficult moments, exploiting grief, confusion, and isolation for financial gain." He gestured toward the defense table where 3 defendants sat in orange jumpsuits. Benjamin Cross, as the mastermind of the legal aspects of this conspiracy, faces 47 separate counts of fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. The state recommends 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Cross, the once confident attorney who had tried to manipulate Bernice into signing away her inheritance, sat slumped in his chair, the weight of his crimes and their consequences finally apparent. Dr. Martin Hoffman, who created fraudulent medical evaluations for financial gain, faces 31 counts related to his participation in this conspiracy. Given his cooperation with authorities and his assistance in identifying other victims, the state recommends 15 years with possibility of parole after 10 years. Hoffman had aged visibly since his arrest, his medical license permanently revoked and his reputation destroyed. Finally, Natasha Thompson, the primary instigator of the conspiracy against Mrs. Thompson and a participant in similar schemes targeting at least 6 other victims, faces 52 counts including fraud, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and flight to avoid prosecution. The state recommends life in prison with possibility of parole after 30 years. Bernice watched as Natasha was led to the defendant's table. The woman who had manipulated her way into the Thompson family and had nearly succeeded in stealing everything Harold had worked for looked small and defeated, her designer clothes replaced by a prison uniform. Judge Wells reviewed her notes before addressing each defendant individually. When she reached Natasha, her words carried particular weight. "Miss Thompson, your crimes go beyond simple theft. You violated the most sacred bonds of family trust, manipulated a grieving widow, and attempted to destroy an innocent woman's life for financial gain. Your actions represent a calculated and sustained attack on human dignity that this court cannot and will not tolerate." The judge's sentence was harsh but fair. Life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, restitution to all victims, and forfeiture of all assets obtained through criminal activity. After the formal sentencing, Judge Wells made an unusual request. "Mrs. Thompson, would you be willing to address the court about the impact this conspiracy has had on your life?" Bernice stood and approached the podium, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the packed courtroom. "Your Honor, 3 months ago I was a grieving widow who had been made to question her own sanity and competence. These criminals didn't just try to steal my money, they tried to steal my identity, my dignity, and my freedom. They wanted to convince me and everyone around me that I was too old, too confused, and too weak to deserve respect or autonomy. She paused, looking directly at Natasha. But they made a critical error. They underestimated the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. They didn't count on the kindness of a stranger who risked his own safety to warn me of their plans. And they certainly didn't anticipate that their attempt to isolate and victimize one woman would unite an entire community in the fight for justice. Bernice's voice grew stronger as she continued. The money they tried to steal was never just about money. It represented my late husband's love, his life's work, and his desire to care for me even after his death. By trying to take that away, they were trying to erase the meaning of our entire relationship. She turned to face the gallery filled with other victims and their families. But we didn't let them win. We stood together, we fought back, and we proved that seniors are not easy targets to be discarded when we become inconvenient. We are people with dignity, wisdom, and strength, and we deserve to be protected and respected. The courtroom was completely silent as Bernice concluded her statement. Your Honor, I hope that our victory here today sends a message to anyone who would prey on vulnerable seniors. We will not be silent, we will not be ashamed, and we will not allow you to steal our lives without a fight. The applause that followed was sustained and emotional, with many of the victims and their families standing to acknowledge Bernice's words. As the hearing concluded and the defendants were led away to begin their sentences, Ray approached Bernice with a smile of satisfaction and pride. Mrs. Thompson, I think Harold would be proud of what you accomplished here today. We accomplished, Ray. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Alexander joined them, his expression reflecting both sadness and admiration. Bernice, I want you to know that I'm committed to making sure something like this never happens again. I'm working with Detective Santos to develop educational programs for seniors about recognizing and avoiding elder fraud. That's exactly what your father would have wanted, Bernice replied, embracing her stepson. He always believed that the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living. As they left the courthouse together, Bernice reflected on how much had changed since that terrifying day in the parking garage. She had not only saved her own inheritance and freedom, but had helped bring justice to dozens of other victims and exposed a nationwide criminal conspiracy. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a community of vulnerable seniors had been transformed into a force for protection and advocacy. The criminals who had seen them as easy targets had instead created an army of determined advocates who would never again allow the elderly to suffer in silence. The fight that had begun with one woman's refusal to be victimized had ended with a victory for every senior citizen who deserved to live with dignity, respect, and security in their golden years. 1 year after the conspiracy against her had been exposed and defeated, Bernice Thompson stood before a crowd of 200 seniors and their families in the community center of Riverside Heights. The Thompson Foundation for Elder Protection had grown from a simple idea into a nationally recognized organization dedicated to preventing elder fraud and supporting victims of financial crimes against seniors. Ray Parker, now impeccably dressed in a tailored suit and carrying the title of executive director, introduced Bernice to the enthusiastic audience. His transformation from homeless man to respected advocate had become a symbol of redemption and second chances that inspired everyone who heard their story. Ladies and gentlemen, Ray announced with pride, please welcome the founder of the Thompson Foundation and the woman whose courage saved not just herself, but hundreds of other seniors across the country, Mrs. Bernice Thompson. The applause was warm and sustained as Bernice approached the podium. At 55, she looked healthier and more vibrant than she had in years. The stress and grief that had made her vulnerable to Natasha's conspiracy had been replaced by a sense of purpose and community that energized every aspect of her life. Thank you all for being here today, Bernice began, her voice carrying easily through the packed room. A year ago, I was a lonely widow who had been convinced by criminals that I was losing my mind. Today I stand before you as proof that it's never too late to fight back, to find new purpose, and to build the life you deserve. She gestured toward a display board showing photographs and statistics from the Foundation's first year of operation. Together, we've helped recover over $8 million in stolen assets for elder fraud victims. We've provided legal support for 43 families fighting fraudulent guardianships. We've trained over 2,000 seniors to recognize and avoid financial scams. The audience murmured with appreciation as Bernice continued her report on the Foundation's accomplishments. But numbers only tell part of our story. The real victory is in the lives we've transformed and the dignity we've restored. She paused to look at several familiar faces in the crowd, victims of Cross's conspiracy who had become volunteers and advocates for other seniors. Margaret Williams was trapped in a fraudulent guardianship for 2 years before we helped her regain control of her life and her assets. She's now our volunteer coordinator for the Eastern region. A dignified African-American woman in her 70s waved from the audience, receiving encouraging applause. Robert Chin lost his life savings to a romance scam but refused to let shame silence him. He now leads our educational workshops on online safety for seniors. A determined-looking man in his 80s stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition. And Dr. Rebecca Foster, my own physician, has created a network of healthcare professionals trained to recognize signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Dr. Foster, sitting in the front row, smiled and nodded to the appreciative audience. Bernice's expression grew more serious as she addressed the ongoing challenges facing seniors in an increasingly complex world. We've learned that the criminals who target seniors are becoming more sophisticated and more aggressive. They use technology, psychology, and legal loopholes to exploit our vulnerabilities. But we've also learned that seniors are far from helpless victims when we work together and support each other. She clicked a remote control, and the display behind her changed to show a map of the United States dotted with dozens of pins. These pins represent Thompson Foundation chapters that have opened in communities across the country. Each one is staffed by volunteers who understand that protecting seniors isn't just about preventing crime, it's about preserving dignity and ensuring that our wisdom and experience are valued rather than exploited. Alexander Thompson rose from his seat in the front row and approached the podium. Over the past year, he had become one of the Foundation's most dedicated volunteers, working to atone for his unwitting role in his wife's conspiracy by protecting other families from similar deception. "May I say something, Bernice?" She smiled and stepped aside, allowing her stepson to address the crowd. "A year ago, I was a man who had been completely fooled by someone I trusted," Alexander said, his voice carrying the hard-won wisdom of painful experience. "I allowed my wife to manipulate me into believing that Bernice was losing her mind, and I nearly became an accomplice in stealing everything my father had worked to provide for her." The room was silent as Alexander continued his heartfelt testimonial. "But Bernice didn't just forgive me, she showed me how to transform my shame and guilt into something positive. The Thompson Foundation doesn't just protect seniors from criminals. It protects families from the lies and manipulation that tear us apart." He turned to face Bernice directly. "My father would be amazed and proud of what you've built from the ashes of that conspiracy. You've turned your worst experience into a gift for thousands of other people." As Alexander returned to his seat, Detective Maria Santos approached the podium. The detective had become a close friend and frequent collaborator with the Foundation, using their victim support network to enhance law enforcement's ability to investigate and prosecute elder fraud. "Mrs. Thompson, I have some news to share with everyone here today," Detective Santos announced. "Thanks to evidence and testimony provided by Thompson Foundation victims and volunteers, we've just completed the largest elder fraud prosecution in federal history. 17 defendants across 6 states have been convicted and sentenced to a combined total of 430 years in prison." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as the detective continued. "More importantly, we've recovered over $23 million in stolen assets and dissolved 41 fraudulent guardianships. None of this would have been possible without the courage of victims who refuse to stay silent and the support network that the Thompson Foundation provides." As Detective Santos returned to her seat, Bernice approached the podium for her closing remarks. "1 year ago, a homeless man named Ray Parker saved my life by warning me about a conspiracy I never saw coming. Today, that same man helps us save lives every day through the work we do together." She looked at Ray with obvious affection and respect. "He taught me that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and that no one is too lost to find their way back to dignity and purpose." Ray stood and bowed slightly to acknowledge the recognition, his own transformation serving as a powerful example of the Foundation's belief in redemption and second chances. "Harold Thompson, my late husband, always believed that the measure of a person's life isn't in what they accumulate, but in what they contribute," Bernice continued. "He would be thrilled to know that the inheritance he left me has become the foundation for protecting other seniors and ensuring that no one faces these battles alone." She paused to look around the room at the faces of people who had become not just colleagues in their mission, but friends and chosen family. "The criminals who targeted me thought they were stealing from a weak, confused old woman who had no one to turn to for help. Instead, they created a movement of strong, determined seniors who refused to be anyone's victims. They thought they were isolating me, but instead they helped me find the largest, most supportive community I've ever been part of." Bernice's voice grew stronger as she concluded her speech. "To every senior who has ever been told you're too old to matter, too confused to understand, or too weak to fight back, you are wrong. You are valuable, you are capable, and you are worthy of respect and protection. And as long as the Thompson Foundation exists, you will never have to face those battles alone." The standing ovation that followed was sustained and emotional, with many audience members wiping away tears as they celebrated not just the Foundation's accomplishments, but their own transformation from potential victims into powerful advocates. As the event concluded and people began to mingle and share their stories, Bernice stood with Ray, Alexander, and Detective Santos, watching the community they had built together. "Harold used to say that the best inheritances aren't money or property," Bernice reflected. "They're the values and principles we pass on to others. I think he'd be happy to know that his legacy has become a gift that keeps giving to people he never met." Ray smiled, his own journey from despair to purpose reflected in his words. "Mrs. Thompson, I think your husband knew exactly what kind of woman he married. He knew that if you were ever threatened, you wouldn't just save yourself, you'd save everyone you could reach." As they walked out of the community center together, Bernice felt a profound sense of completion. The terrifying conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her life had instead become the foundation for the most meaningful work she had ever done. She had not only survived the attack on her dignity and independence, she had transformed it into a victory for every senior citizen who deserved to age with security, respect, and grace. The homeless man's warning in the parking garage had saved her inheritance. But more than that, it had helped her discover an inheritance of purpose and community that was worth far more than any amount of money. Harold's legacy lived on, not just in the assets he had left her, but in the lives they were now touching together. The new beginning that had started with such fear and confusion had blossomed into a life of meaning, connection, and hope. And for the first time since Harold's death, Bernice Thompson looked toward the future with excitement rather than anxiety, knowing that the best chapters of her story were still being written.